Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of Crime and Law Stories. Now, the case we're talking about today, what's the expression? Is it across the pond? Over the pond? I think that's what it takes us across the pond. I think that's what it is to the UK. And I know a lot of you are my UK watchers over there. So, today, that is what we are talking about. And it's about this young girl who had her whole life ahead of her. Went out for a night with her friends to party, to drink, to hang out. One of her friends was kind enough to keep her under their wing, make sure she got home safely, and then disaster happened, and it's a cautionary tale, right? But it's one that, unfortunately, I feel like needs more recognition, and I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this particular case either. So, some of you have been requesting it. It is definitely a very sad, interesting one that needs a lot of awareness. So, we are going to jump right in. To those who knew and loved her, 20-year-old Keeley Bunker was one in a million. She was like this never-to-be-replaced kind of girl. She was one of the most gentle and caring people that her friends and her family ever knew. She was born and raised in Tamworth, England, and she was very close to her parents and her two younger siblings. That was in part because she was extremely nurturing, and she really went out of her way to take care of others, stranger or not. And Kee just had that aura about her where if you were ever near her, you felt safe. You felt cozy, like you were taken care of. And she was like that with everyone, whether you just met her 5 minutes ago or if you were in her inner circle and a friend of hers for years. She had a huge soft spot for her family and her friends. She was selfless, always looking for ways to help people, looking to see if anyone needed her to step in and help them out, even if that meant that she was giving up most of her time and her energy. I mean, she was just a helper. But Keeley wasn't. Just beautiful on the inside. She was also extremely beautiful on the outside as well, with her petite yet muscular figure. She was every bit of Barbie, kind of like come to life. She had this long brown hair, piercing brown eyes to match. She had perfect, straight white teeth that most people, dream of having their whole life or use crest white strips like me, if you want those. And one thing that really stood out about her was her love for kids. And on many days, you could find her actually looking after her disabled cousin. Her aunt had multiple kids, and Kee was always looking for a chance to just kind of, help her out and take some of the pressure off, just really be a lending hand for her. She was also always checking in on her siblings, making sure to be the best role model and sister that she could possibly be for them. She knew that she would be a great mother one day, and Kee was so excited about the idea of that. She was always telling her family that she wanted at minimum 3 kids one day. She said once she found her person and settled down, who knows, maybe even more. Maybe she would want more than 3 kids, but she knew she always wanted at minimum 3. Well, by September of 2019, Kee had just celebrated her big 20. She turned 20 years old on September 7th, and she was so excited for what the next decade had in store for her. She wasn't a teenager anymore. She was now a young woman. She was excited about establishing a career for herself as a teacher, too. And she even had scored an interview for an assistant teacher position, and she was feeling really confident and really good about it. The interview was scheduled for the end of the month, so she luckily still had some time to prepare for it, but she was gearing up for it and really excited. Now, this interview wasn't just important to her because it was for the job of her dreams, but also because it was at the same school that she had gone to when she was a kid. So she was thinking about more of that nostalgia element to it, the past, about her own childhood, also about the future and all of the big milestones that she hoped to hit in her 20s. Things like being in a serious relationship, falling in love, maybe getting married, getting started on having those 3 or more kids. And of course, all of those things would, yes, take time, and she knew that. So she also knew how important it was to celebrate just being in the now and in the present, like celebrating her birthday, which she did on September 18th. And it was kind of a weird night for a birthday party. It had actually been more than a week since her actual birthday. It is normal for people to sometimes wait for a weekend to celebrate, but the 18th was a Wednesday, and it was also the day before her big interview was to take place. So yeah, it was weird timing to go out and party on that night out of all of the nights, but it's what Keeley wanted to do. She wanted to have a good time, and nothing was going to stop her from doing exactly that. Anyway, Kee and her best friend Monique had planned to attend a rap concert in Birmingham. Kee was really into music, and there was a particular British rapper who was performing that night, and Key was a big fan. I mean, so what better way to celebrate a birthday than at a fun concert with your best friend, right? The concert was everything they could have hoped for, but it was also over way too quick. I mean, Monique and Keeley, they wanted to party all night. They weren't going to head straight home after the show was over. Definitely not. So after the concert ended around 10 a.m, Key and Monique agreed to keep the fun going. They wanted to still go out. The night was not over. So their next stop was going to be like this popular nightclub type bar situation called Snobs. And CCTV footage shows the girls heading into the club dressed in their best, ready to have some fun. Now, I'm not sure if they were drinking at the concert before, but I do know that once they were at Snobs, they did have a few drinks. And to be specific, each of them had around 4 Red Bull vodkas. Now, I know to some of us that might sound like a lot, but Monique claimed that neither one of them was drunk. I mean, tipsy maybe, but drunk no. Those 4 drinks happened over the course of about 3 hours as well, and they were at Snobs the entire time. Now, I'm not sure exactly how, but somewhere along the way, while they were at the bar, somebody joined the 2 girls, making it now a 3-person type of party. And their third friend that joined was one of Keel's friends that she had known since they were both little. His name was Wesley Street. Wesley was the same age as Monique and Key, and they weren't all like best friends, but they had known each other for so long and had stayed in each other's lives for so many years. So at that point, it was fair to say that they were at least very good friends. And Key had known Wesley since they were just around 10 or 11 years old, and Monique had met him in high school. They both really enjoyed Wesley's company whenever they were around him. He was fun to be around, and he always let loose and had fun no matter who was with them or who was watching. So even though it was only the 3 of them, they partied, they danced, and they really had the time of their lives. And of course, because we live in the age of social media, Snapchat, TikTok, all of these things, they of course documented every single step of the night. There are videos of them dancing, acting goofy, and just having what looks to be a pretty fun birthday celebration. Music Monique later noted that out of all 3 of them, Wesley was definitely the drunkest. He had actually shown up ready to party, so for every drink the girls had, he had 2, if not more. But like all good nights, it eventually came to an end. And as a reminder, they were all partying in Birmingham, but both Keeley and Monique lived about 30 minutes away, give or take. It depended on if you were driving, taking public transit, or whatever. But the point is, it was too far to walk for sure. So the original plan was either to take the last train back home or for Monique's mom to come pick them up. But for whatever reason, their plans ended up changing, and they decided to get a taxi instead. So the taxi dropped Keeley, Monique, and Wesley off at a pub called Weatherspoons. Then, instead of the 3 of them splitting up and all going their separate ways, they all walked to Monique's house together. Key had some things over at Monique's house because she had gotten ready there before they went out to that concert. So she wanted to go pick them up before she went back home. Monique pleaded with her to just, spend the night. It makes the most sense because by this time, it was about 4 a.m. But Key was determined to get home and sleep and be in her own bed, have her own stuff around her before her interview the next day, which was scheduled for 2 p.m. So it's not like she had to worry about oversleeping or anything like that, but she wanted to be prepared. And I get the appeal of wanting to get a good night's sleep in a familiar bed that's your own, especially ahead of a big night. Monique didn't love the idea. She felt like it would have just been easier and safer for Key to just stay there. But Kaylee was pretty stubborn, and that's what she wanted to do. Plus, she reminded Monique that she was going to have Wesley with her to walk her home before he went off on his own and went to his way. So it was going to be perfectly fine. She told her, "Hey, I've got Wes. I'll be fine. I'll walk back with him. I'm safe. I'll be fine." Now it was hard to imagine keeping anyone safe because Wesley was pretty drunk. Like the type of drunk where you have to keep reminding your friends every 10 minutes or so just how drunk you are. And you probably know exactly what I'm talking about if you've ever been drunk before. But when they had been at the bar, some random bystander had noticed how out of it Wesley was. And they even described him as being a N out of 10 drunk. And on the taxi ride home, they even needed the driver to pull over for a little bit because Wesley told them that he was going to throw up. But despite that, even though he was wasted, he was still a guy. And Key was like this tiny 4'11", barely hitting 100 lb girl. And she was sort of the person who probably wouldn't be able to really hold her own in a fight. So I guess in her mind, having Wes around would make her feel safer no matter how drunk he was. People could still see him, see that he was bigger, see that she had a guy with her and, wouldn't mess with them. So Monique and Keeley hugged and said their goodbyes. Their see you later. And that was that. Then the following day, Monique sent Key a Snapchat message. And Key was pretty active usually on Snapchat or her phone in general for that matter, but she never read it and she never reacted to it. And that was weird. I mean, no need to panic, right? She was probably just busy getting ready for her interview, not paying attention to her phone. But just to give herself some peace of mind, Monique messaged her again. And this one read, "Are you all right? Did you get home okay?" But again, there was no reaction, no response, no indication that Keeley ever read it. And then when 2 rolled around, Key failed to show up for her job interview. And this was extremely out of character for her. She was responsible, always on time, and she knew how big of an opportunity this job really was. So, it was a clear sign that something was wrong. And while I don't know the exact details of how her family and friends found out that Keeley missed this interview, I do know that once they learned about it, it was a huge red flag for them. And from what I could find, it seemed like Monique was the one to really get the ball rolling after this whole ignored Snapchat message situation. And even though Kay didn't live alone and she lived with her family, she was old enough to kind of go out without people checking in on her and do her own thing. So I don't think her family right away found anything off. They probably just thought that she had decided to stay with Monique last minute, and that's why she didn't come home. But then once they realized that Monique was looking for her, too, and that she should have come home the night before, but hadn't, they instantly began to worry. So this is when Key was reported as a missing person. And the police wasted no time in launching an investigation. But at the same time, Monique was doing her own investigative work. And you can tell how much Keeley meant to Monique and how close they truly were, because she wasn't just going to sit back and wait while the detectives did their job. She had questions that she demanded immediate answers for. Monique also remembered how much she had argued with Key the night before. How worried she had been about her safety. And now it looked like all of her worst fears were coming true. So, she decided to go straight to the source, Wesley. Now, it's important to note that the last 2 people to have seen Key, the 2 people who were supposed to be some of her closest friends, had very different reactions to her disappearance. Monique was worried sick. She wanted answers, and more importantly, she wanted to find her friend. And I don't know this for sure, but I also have to imagine that she was probably feeling some type of guilt. Maybe thinking to herself, if she had only pushed a little harder and not Keeley walk alone late at night, maybe they wouldn't be in this mess. Yet, what was weird was that Wesley didn't seem as concerned or worried. Honestly, he was a little annoyed with everyone who was kind. Of swarming him all at once with these questions. They wanted to know what happened the night before. Had Key seemed unusual? Had she said anything? Met up with anybody? All of these different things? And he just didn't want to talk about it. Eventually, though, he did open up. He started talking about what had happened that night, except it was almost like he couldn't keep his story straight. He described his version of what happened between him and Keeley, and he described it multiple times. But each time he retold it, little details were changing. There was one thing, though, that stayed consistent. He said he walked her almost to her house, but instead of dropping her off there, he left her near a phone booth. He says that was because all of the drinking was now finally catching up with him, and he was feeling really sick. So he wanted to get home as fast as possible, which meant heading straight back instead of walking Keeley the rest of the way to her house. So they said bye, and that was the last time he saw her. That was his story. Now, according to Monique, the whole time that people were asking him about this, he was acting angry. He even mentioned the fact that everybody was blaming him for Keeley going missing. Not just in the sense that he should have done a better job of protecting her, but that a lot of people believed it was his fault, that he had done something to Key. Despite his poor attitude, he agreed to come to Monique's house to talk with her about it in person. He also agreed to show her the exact route that he had walked home with Keeley. So that's what he did. He showed her where they allegedly walked and even went to the phone booth where he last saw her. The places he showed her weren't all that significant. But what stood out the most to Monique was his lack of consistency in the little details that he shared about the night before. Again, to her, she felt like he was contradicting himself, over and over again. For example, Wesley said that the reason he ditched Key at the phone booth was because of all the drinking catching up to him and he felt like he was going to be sick, but he said he never actually got sick. And like I mentioned before, then he said he actually did throw up, but after he made it home, he wanted to throw up in the piece of his own home. Then he said he actually threw up outside of his house before he could make it inside. So just little things, and I understand it, little details, but they weren't adding up. And don't get me wrong, it totally could make sense under any normal circumstances to not remember much from the night before if you were that drunk. But in Monica's mind, the issue was less about where he threw up, but more why he couldn't get it straight, why his story was changing. Why not just say, honestly, I don't even remember if I threw up or not or where I threw up, rather than just saying a bunch of different things. Now, while Monique was talking to Wesley and spotting lots of red flags, the police were also doing their own investigation, and it was quickly becoming very clear to them that Wesley was the one they needed to talk to. They had questions, and he was the only one who could answer them. So the police came by and they picked Wesley up in a patrol car. They asked him to take them along that exact route he had walked the night with Keeley before, just like he had already done with Monique. He wasn't in trouble. He wasn't under arrest. They just wanted more information so that they could make their investigation more precise. And they knew that understanding the walk home would definitely help them. So again, no big deal. Nothing. Personal. Yet Wesley seemed to feel like it was some kind of personal attack. He had this bad attitude and this whole woe is me mindset when the police picked him up and asked him, what should have been fairly easy questions. I mean, if this was your friend who was missing and you were the last person to see them, wouldn't you want to do everything in your power to get them back home safe and sound? Wouldn't you feel some kind of guilt or responsibility that maybe, if you had been less drunk or walked them literally to their doorstep, all of this could have been avoided? Unless, of course, there was something that you were trying to hide, which is exactly what the investigators were starting to think. And the longer that they talked to Wesley, the more that they were thinking that. And luckily, the police who were with Wesley at the time of this had on their body cameras, so we can see for ourselves just how he was acting. No, I'm not. It's not what you want is to be back in the police car. I'm getting the blame. No, one's blaming you. Me and my you said when I was at the house that all I needed to do was speak to the officer and then I could go and look for Keeley and then you take my phone off. But as my colleague said at the minute, there's a lot of people involved in what's happening, of which we are PCs, and there are people a lot higher up than us who are making decisions. And I don't now when you say you're going to take my phone now, I feel like you're blaming me. We haven't once since we've been sat in this car. I think your dad can vouch. We haven't once blamed you for anything. All we've done, we've been told by our bosses that we need to take us on the no, to take you on the scene. Where it's gone, the route. So have a drive of the route. And we are literally just following those instructions. And I know you've got a lot of questions, and I know, your parents probably got a lot of questions, and I think it's it's obvious when I say that we've been with you, so I can't answer those questions because we've been sat in the car. Yeah, but they have to do what they're told. And from the police side, they've got a tick sheet. They have to make sure that there isn't anything on your phone. Yeah. And they have to kind of cross you out. Yeah, this isn't just for the sake of it, they've obviously done it for a reason and it's to help. So, all right, that's all we want to do. We want to help. And it's scary. And they understand that it's scary. Okay, I just don't want them to laugh if they go through my Google. No, they don't. They're not worried about the girl, Wes. Wes, all we're going to look for on your phone is going to be things that relate to you and her. Right? We don't care about your Google, We're not allowed to look for stuff like that because, ultimately, we don't need to. Because it has to be transparent, mate. That's all it is. All right? He doesn't understand. Now, I know that clip wasn't very long, but I still think that it was very revealing because it showed how Wesley was acting annoyed and complaining about the way that everyone was blaming him instead of actually trying to be, helpful. And as you saw towards the end of that clip, the officers asked Wesley if they could see his phone. And even though he seemed a little resistant at first, he did end up handing it over. However, what we didn't see in that clip was that, apparently when they asked him for his passcode, he gave them the wrong set of numbers at first, which could get any more suspicious. And after finally getting the right passcode, the investigators were able to access his phone. And the very first place that they looked, say it with me, Google search history. The Google will get you every time. And I don't even know how many cases we've covered by now where people will search stupid things like how to hide a body or how to get away with murder. And my best guess is that they were hoping to find something damning like that on his phone so that they could just arrest him right then and there on the spot while he was already in the police car. But even though they didn't find anything like that, they still noticed that he was acting pretty odd, and he was noticeably uncomfortable about the fact that they had his phone with them. So when they asked him why he was acting like that, why, he was being weird. He simply said he didn't want them to laugh at him going through his search history, which is weird, right? I mean, I know some people do, yes, have embarrassing searches in their history. I know for me, I sometimes Google the weirdest stuff, like, what does this mean? What does that mean? Like, I have fluid in my ear right now, which I do. Like, how do I get it out? Like, ow, that kind of hurt. My gosh, is my ear tube, what's that called? Is my ear canal bruised? That really hurt. But, ow. But I do have a lot of weird things and embarrassing things. So I get that. But it also, in a heavy moment like that, feels like a bit of a bizarre thing to say, right? Like, I'm just nervous. I'm weird because I don't want you to laugh at me. I don't know. Makes me feel weird. But also context matters, right? I mean, the fact that Keeley was missing, it mattered in all of this. However embarrassed Wesley might have felt assuming that story was true, it definitely is not as important as finding Key. And the cops knew that, and so did her loved ones who had already put together a search party. It wasn't just her friends and family either, but also some strangers from the community who all gathered to walk that same route that Wesley had given Monique. Their hope was to find some kind of clue along the way, and as they were searching, they made sure to check out all the different side areas along this route. One of them was a stream that eventually flowed into a small tunnel. And when the search party made it to that stream, they ended up splitting up so that there was at least one person, if not multiple people, checking either side of it. And as they were checking, at around 9:00 p.m., the whole search party heard a scream. It was so deep and so intense that they knew that it could only mean one thing. And Keel's family recognized the scream as coming from her uncle Jason Brown. An off-duty police officer who was part of the search later described what he heard, and he said it was one of the most horrendous screams or shouts that he had ever heard in his life. And that's coming from someone who worked in law enforcement and has probably seen and heard a ton of just sick and twisted things. And to people there, it felt like time was standing still. Seconds after the scream, Jason yelled something that sounded like, "I've found her." Inside of the tunnel, lying face first in the water and covered by branches and brush, there was Key. She was dead at only 20 years old. And I can't imagine the trauma of finding a loved one dead. I mean, it would be terrible, even if she had been lying there peacefully looking like she had just fallen asleep. But that was far from the case for her. It was so much worse. Her black leggings and underwear had been pushed down, and they were caught on her sneakers, which that told Jason at a single glance that she had been sexually assaulted when she was killed. Besides that, her long chocolate dark brown hair was caught in these branches, and some of her hair was even dangling in the murky water. Well, Jason was so shocked by this discovery, and also a little panicked, that his first impulse was to grab Keeley by the arm and try to lift her up out of the water. But then he realized the truth, and he realized that she was beyond saving. She was dead, and this area was now a crime scene, and it needed to be preserved. Later, the police determined that Keeley had been killed by strangulation, and she was confirmed sexually assaulted, which was pretty obvious from the start. The autopsy report also showed that Key actually had around 100 different injuries on her body, including bruises on her face and scratches on her forehead and neck. Her lower lip also had a laceration, and there was deep bruising beneath the skin of her face, and there was hemorrhaging all along the lining of her mouth. It also showed there was alcohol in her system, which we did already know she had been drinking, but she wasn't drunk. In fact, The autopsy said that she was under the legal driving limit. However, in the autopsy, there were also traces of marijuana and MDMA, which MDMA is like ecstasy or Molly. However, in the findings, there was a quote that said it would not have had a significant effect on Keeley sufficient enough to explain the cause of her death. So, although that was in her system, it wasn't tied to her cause of death. After her body was discovered, Wesley, because he was the last person with her, was arrested. He was the last person to see her and to be with her, and he had been acting more than suspicious. The investigators were more than confident that they had the right guy, and that taking him into custody would either one, give them more time to find evidence against him, or two, he would just confess. Wesley, you don't need to listen to me. This moment in time rest. Okay, you don't have to say anything. We may harm you. Make sure my questions. Anything you do say may be given evidence. Okay, so I'm going to take you to a brief station now. All right, we'll sort everything else there. All right. Okay. My colleagues here are just going to stay with you, with your mom and dad. So, all right. Just to keep them safe. All right. Are you able to scoot over, mate? Is that all right? 'Cause I'll sit next to you. I'll sit here. All right. Grab your dad's cable if I can. You got it. Yeah. Yeah. Just put your seatbelt on, mate, and I'll sit next to you in a minute. Okay, that's Dad's phone charger. Dad's phone charger. Yeah, we're going to start moving. You just step away from the car for me. Wait a minute, please. We need to go now. Stand up, please. Wait a minute. So, we need to go now. You just need to come away from the car for me, please. Good. I'll let the sergeant discuss that with you. All right. Applause. 22. The investigators were really crossing their fingers for the confession, hoping that that would come. But honestly, even if he didn't just come straight out and confess, they were really confident that it would only be a matter of time until they could confidently prove that he had done it. Maybe they would find some physical evidence on Keel's body, or maybe even a witness that would come forward. It was just a matter of getting what they needed. And I'm sure that this is no surprise, but Wesley was not cooperative at all. While he was on the way to the station, the police asked him if he had any questions about his arrest, and he answered, not really. And at one point, he even brought up how hungry he was and asked if there would be food at the station. Just very casual, and it almost seemed like the version of Wesley from before. You know, the one who felt personally victimized by everybody's incessant questions about his and Keeley's journey the night before. It's like that version of him was now long gone. He was just cool, calm, collected, and instead he just initially played it cool and continued to deny having any involvement in her disappearance and murder. Except when he gave his statement, he ended up changing his story 4 times in total. After his arrest, he just couldn't stick to his story or keep the details straight. The one and only thing that was consistent in each story was his need to make sure that the investigators believed he was innocent, or as innocent as can possibly be. Which, spoiler alert, the investigators bought none of it. At first, he denied that there had been any kind of sexual encounter between him and Keeley. His story was that he dropped her off at the phone booth and, that was that. Then he left, and he had nothing to do with her disappearance or what had happened to her, and he definitely hadn't been in the park where her body was found. But then the police showed their hands. They had CCTV footage that put him in that area. Plus, his phone GPS also showed him near the body at around the time that she was killed and placed there. So, since he had no choice, Wesley now backed into a corner, changed his story again because he knew there was no way to explain all of that away. And I mean, let's talk about that evidence. Between 4:28 a.m. and 4:52 a.m., Wesley's phone was not showing his GPS location. However, at 4:54 a.m., his phone pinged at the northern edge of the park where Keeley's body was later found. And that's also when and where CCTV footage caught a figure that was believed to be Wesley running away from the park. He ran off until he was out of sight. And speaking of CCTV, Wesley was actually captured on a lot of surveillance cameras throughout the night, even before Keeley's death. So his exact whereabouts at specific times, they were pretty easy to track. So now that he had to confront this evidence, Wesley claimed that he had actually walked Key to the park. Once they were there, they were acting goofy. He was still drunk, so he started giving her a piggyback ride, just messing around and having fun. But somehow Keeley fell off of his back. Supposedly, she hit her head on a gatepost and then she went unconscious. Wesley claimed that he panicked and was holding her in his arms, asking her to wake up, but that her only response was that her eyelids were kind of flickering open and closed. So he says he knew that something was seriously wrong. He apparently even went as far as to rub her back and chest trying to get her to breathe and to wake up, but he had no success. Did he call an ambulance, though? No. And what about why or how her body ended up in that tunnel? Which, to be fair, I doubt Wesley even thought to make up an excuse for why he dumped the body when he just kind of made up this load of bullshit. But he was just like changing his story over and over and over again, and the investigators never believed his story either. By the time he had crafted this explanation, Keel's autopsy report had come back, and her cause of death was strangulation. There were also no signs of blunt force trauma to her head or her brain, so clearly she didn't fall and she didn't hit her head. So Wesley realized again that his cover story wasn't adding up. The police weren't buying it. So one more time, he changed his story. Now he said, okay, we were flirting and there was some sexual touching, whatever that means, but there was no sex. But he didn't explain how this flirting and sexual touching led to her ending up dead in a tunnel. Later on, the police tested Keeley's body to see if there was any DNA on it that wasn't her own. And sure enough, the results came back as being Wesley's DNA. And when he found out about these results, he once again switched up his story. Except this one was the last and final story that he told. He claimed that he and Keeley had been walking on their way home just harmlessly flirting with each other. And his specific words were, it wasn't like touchy type of flirt or anything like that it was just looking at each other in a flirtatious way. Then he claimed that by the time they made it to the park, they began kissing. He asked her, "Do you want to have sex with me?" And according to him, she said yes, and he really harped on that detail. It was clearly very important to Wesley that the police believed that the sex was consensual, which to me actually seems like a bit of a red flag. Like if the sex really was consensual, he wouldn't need to be so hung up on that detail, right? It was like he was so hyper-focused on emphasizing that you know that she had supposedly said yes that it almost makes you stop and ask, well, did she? Are you sure? And he claimed that she was the one who started the flirting and that she made it clear to him she wanted to have sex. So after she started it, he says he simply just kind of rolled with it. He claimed that during sex, he had his arms around her neck, not like he was attacking her, but more like he was cradling her, you know, being loving. He said he had no idea that it was a problem for him to have his forearm over the front of her neck until, according to him, at one point she just stopped moving or responding to him. And his exact words were that she, quote, went floppy. He allegedly then realized that she wasn't moving, breathing, or responding in any type of way. So he checked her pulse and there wasn't one. That's because she was already dead. And he says, that's when he started panicking, which how do you go from one extreme to another and not notice any difference until she's, quote, floppy? I mean, that's beyond me. But either way, because he was supposedly so panicked at the time, he claimed that he never once thought to call for an ambulance or call for help. He would just rather hide the body and pretend it had nothing to do with him. That would be the best case scenario and that would work. He told the investigators that he then put her body in the tunnel area and covered it up with branches as best as he could before going home and then taking off and falling asleep for the night. Which, how could anyone sleep so easily after accidentally killing a friend? Does this detail signal anything about maybe how the story isn't true and how he didn't have any remorse and was able to sleep well at night? I don't know. But by the next morning, he had sobered up, and so he was thinking more clearly. So, not long after he woke up, he decided to go back to where he had left her body, and that's when he wanted to cover it with more branches. He knew that he had done a terrible job at hiding it the night before. And in fact, he actually made multiple trips that day, going back and forth, covering her body more and more. I would imagine probably as his paranoia just was increasing. And according to him, that was that. That's all the police needed to know. Except the investigators already knew this story of consensual sex was like a load of BS. Key's body had scratch marks all over her entire neck. It was clear that she had been trying to fight Wesley off and trying to get him to take his hands off of her. But sadly, she wasn't able to get away from him before she lost consciousness. On top of that, Wesley also had scratch marks on his face that Monique claimed were not there during their time together at the Bar Snobs that evening, which again, this fit with the police's theory that Keeley had been trying to fight him off. The evidence was literally all over his face. And Key's close friends also added that there was absolutely no way that she would have willingly had sex with him. Not after a few drinks, not when they were alone, never. Like I said, they weren't all the best of friends, but she still saw him as more of a brotherly figure and never anything else. So, it made sense why he was now going out of his way to emphasize so much that this was consensual because he didn't want to admit the truth. He had killed Key during a sexual assault. Now, as for the physical evidence, Wesley's debit card had fallen out of his pocket somewhere along the way when he was trying to hide Keeley's body. So, confession aside, that put him at the crime scene. Both his and Cale's jackets were also found in the area. And Wesley's jacket had makeup all over both sleeves. It was the exact kind of makeup that Keeley had been wearing that night, and on top of that, CCTV footage caught him in the area. A witness even came forward to say that they saw him in that area around the same time. And let's not forget his cell phone had pinged at that exact location. So, yeah, between 4:28 a.m. and 4:52 a.m., Wesley's phone wasn't showing his GPS location, like I said before, which he did try to use in his favor, claiming that he wasn't in the area, but it did ping at 4:54. So, I mean, seems to me like the writing is on the wall, right? He turned the phone off as he's doing the deed or right after while he's doing the cover-up, and then turns it back on. So, even though Wesley had decided not to confess, I mean, there was no way that he was getting away with any of this. And it's hard not to sit back and look at this case, or really any true crime case for that matter, and wonder why. Why did Wesley take the life of someone he had known for years? Why did he take advantage of Keeley in more ways than one, and specifically abused the trust that she had put in him to get her home safely? She had felt safe with him. She had never imagined for a second that she was in danger. And sometimes, unfortunately, we don't get the answer. Not that many murderers are, eager and willing to share their deepest and darkest thoughts and desires. But after Wesley's arrest and the news of his upcoming trial was in every single newspaper and headlines on the nightly news, women started coming forward and sharing their own traumatizing experiences with Wesley. As it turned out, his attack on Keeley may not have been an isolated incident. Allegedly, he had brutally assaulted many women. Now, of course, Wesley denied all of this, which wasn't enough to stop him from being charged with 5 sexual offenses, unrelated to Keeley's case. Also, 2 counts of rape and 3 counts of sexual assault. And one alleged victim was just 16 years old when her attack happened in 2015. Another was a 15-year-old girl in 2017, and another was a 20-year-old girl in 2019, which was that same year that Keeley had been murdered and assaulted. Now, given that history, it's hard to believe that this was just a crime of passion, or a case where Wesley lost control because of the alcohol. Instead, it was almost like the moment that Keeley reassured Monique that she would be safe with Wesley, her fate was set in stone. He knew that he had her in his grasp and that her guard was down. And one of the victims actually said that the news coverage around Keel's case is what gave her the confidence to come forward with her story and seek justice. Which I have to say with that, it really sucks that we live in a society where victims only feel like they can speak up once another victim's name has come to light and has been, their story has been made public. But knowing what kind of person Keeley was, I think she would still be happy that in a way, even after death, she was still supporting and taking care of other women. Not that it made what happened to her okay, but just that as terrible of a situation as this was, at least some good came out of it. So Wesley's trial began the following year in July of 2020, and it lasted a full 4 weeks. Key's family and friends all gathered every day to show their support for their daughter, their sister, their best friend. But each time Wesley doubled down and he kept lying about Keeley, and it broke their hearts all over again. His defense argued that while he did kill Keeley, technically it was totally accidental. He was still peddling that story that it was all just an unfortunate result of rough consensual sex that they were having. And I'm sure that the defense knew that they were screwed and were kind of just hoping for at least a lesser charge and sentence. But it didn't sound very likely because never once did Wesley act like he was sorry or remorseful. This woman that he had known for years, this woman who quite literally trusted him with her life, might as well have been a stranger based on how unbothered he was acting. At one point, the prosecution even asked him why he insisted on lying time and time again. And his response, quote, "I couldn't tell them that I had slept with her and accidentally strangled her." So, I just went with it. I mean, clearly Wesley didn't care about Key. He only cared about himself, right? And all of that being said, the prosecution kept emphasizing one point. They didn't think that Wesley was any kind of criminal mastermind. I mean, obviously it had been easy enough to catch him, but also they didn't think that he had really planned this in advance. He didn't begin the night knowing that the evening was going to turn into murder and that he was going to sexually assault and murder one of his best friends or good friends. So they believed that he probably was genuinely having fun with Key and Monique that night. You know, at first that it was really just this good drunk time right up until he was in a position to be walking Keeley home, and then when he was alone with her with no witnesses around, it's when he decided to give in to temptation. Or as they put it, he fell back into a pattern of behavior. And to prove that the sex wasn't consensual, they played a short clip from CCTV cameras near the Y Park. Unfortunately, we don't have access to these videos, but thankfully there are sources that describe what happens in the video pretty well. And apparently it's from right before Keel's murder. In the clip, Key and Wesley are walking side by side. It's no big deal, but at one point Wesley puts his arm around her, drawing her closer in, and Key kind of nonchalantly brushes him off, and then she keeps walking, leaving the frame. According to the prosecutors, her body language wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't the way that you would act if you were trying to initiate consensual sex with someone. She was clearly signaling that she wasn't interested. It was a nice way of saying, no thanks, and kind of like back away. Probably because Key didn't want to hurt Wesley's feelings since she considered him a friend. But still, even nice no's are still no's. His defense team argued that this video did not prove anything. Instead, they said that in this video they were, quote, play fighting, still flirting with one another, playing the whole hard-to-get thing, whatever it is. And Wesley specifically said on the stand that in that clip, Key was just teasing him. He also repeated the same story that I covered before about him accidentally killing her during consensual sex. Then he tried to explain why he took her jacket off when he dumped her body, and basically he said that it was because it was a very bright color. He didn't say what color it was, but he did say that it was incredibly visible in the water in the tunnel, and he couldn't cover it up enough to make it not noticeable, which I have to say is so frustrating to me because you'll remember her body was found with her pants and underwear down around her ankles, which means this creep, this guy, took enough time and care to take off her jacket, but he couldn't be bothered to pull her pants up and give her body some kind of dignity. So even when this guy was trying to defend himself and make it look like a horrible mistake, he just kept giving himself away, making it so abundantly clear that he didn't care about Keeley at all. He only cared about saving his own skin. And just listen to this quote that he gave on the stand and tell me it isn't one of the most self-serving things you've ever heard. He said, quote, "I was just thinking, why me? I didn't mean for this to happen. I was just thinking, how am I in this position? Are you kidding me? Are you freaking kidding me, bro? Like, what are you talking about? This isn't about you, my man. Like, it just makes me so enraged." Even during his cross-examination, when the prosecution asked him if he thought that he was selfish, his answer was pretty simple. He said, "No, I put her in that pond, and that's something that I have to sleep with." Now, thankfully, the judge and the jury were not buying any of it. Like, not at all. So after some time deliberating, the jury announced that they had made their decision. They found Wesley guilty. Then came the sentencing hearing, and like always, there were a lot of people coming forward to give victim impact statements. And we're used to hearing about statements from the murder victim's family and friends. But in Wesley's case, the court also heard from the women who had survived his reported assaults. One person said, quote, "After Wesley attacked me, I was scared to tell anyone. However, looking back, if something made you physically sick in your stomach, it is definitely not okay." Another said that she felt such an overwhelming sense of guilt and shame after her attack, which sadly is so common, but so much so that the victim didn't do anything. She said, "It wasn't until I heard the sad news concerning Keeley that I even found the courage to tell someone. It was at that point that I felt the full force of what had happened to me. But by that time, I had already dealt with my grief in what I feel was a very bad way." Keeley's mother, Debbie, spoke about how she lost her, quote, precious and beautiful daughter, and how she wished and hoped that Wesley would never get out, never see the light of day again, just like Key would never get to. She also said, as a mother, I could give you 1,000 images and say 1,000,000 words, but nothing could ever describe the beautiful daughter that was taken away from her parents, her family, and her friends. Key was the kindest, most caring, innocent young lady that you could ever meet, and was only just starting out in her life. All of our lives have been massively broken, and they will never be the same again. Such is the hell we feel. We are incapable of showing any forgiveness, and throughout our lives, we will never forget our Key. Her father, Christopher, added, a once happy family home is now filled with sadness and emptiness since Key was taken. He also said that her siblings were, quote, a shadow of who they used to be after her death. Wesley was ultimately sentenced to 29 years to life. Although Keeley received the justice that she deserved, her loss was still like a black shadow that hung over her family and friends. What follows is the family statement from all of the family and friends of Keeley Bunker. Keeley Bunker, our Keeley Bunks, was the kindest, most beautiful young lady you could ever wish to meet. Keeley was compassionate, loving, caring, and would put others before herself always. Keeley loved everyone unconditionally, and nothing was ever too much trouble. She had many friends. She didn't realize just how many she had. We know that she was loved by all. We could never have wished for any more from Key. She was perfect in every way. Her life was taken away so cruelly and far too soon. Keeley had many dreams that have now all been stolen from both her and from us, her family and friends. We will not see Keeley Mary go on to have children, enjoy any holiday work. The world was hers, and Keeley was just beginning to live a happy life. As Keel's family, the outcome of this trial will never be enough in terms of justice. It will never bring our Key back to us. We miss her so much, and no words to ever express the positive thing. Never ever will we forget the precious service that we had with our Key, together with all of the memories that we will always hold dear. We love you. And the police stated what everyone now knew. I think there's some modacity in his arrogance there, and playing the martyr as to why are people blaming me when I left her at that phone box, knowing full well where she was and what he'd done, and the efforts he'd gone to concealing her to delay people finding her, if ever. Her friend, and as did Key, did trusted him to walk her home that night. And there's only Wesley to blame that she didn't make it home. Now, before I wrap up, there's one last thing I want to touch on. One more important part of this story. If you've been watching my show for a while, or if you follow true crime in general, then you know that Wesley's defense wasn't exactly unique. There are a ton of guys out there who will kill a woman, get caught, and then try to say, it was an accident. We were just having rough sex. Things got out of hand. And you hear this often enough, that it's kind of like a cliche after a certain point. Well, after Keel's case, some lawmakers in England and Wales decided that they had had enough. They were sick of killers trying to use this excuse to wiggle out of their charges. So they proposed a bill basically saying that you're not allowed to even use that as a defense. The bill was more formally titled the Domestic Abuse Act, and it was passed by the UK Parliament in 2021. And this bill specifically stated that a person is unable to consent to the affliction of harm that results in actual bodily harm, or other more serious injury, or by extension to their own death, for the purposes of obtaining sexual gratification. And in situations like Keel's case, where she isn't here to share her side of the story, a defendant is unable to rely on a victim's consent to the affliction of such harm as part of any so-called rough sex gone wrong defense. Now, Keeley's murder wasn't the only factor that led to this bill. It was more like this defense got offered again and again, and it happened so many times that these lawmakers realized they had to do something better to protect victims. But her case definitely was a factor, and it helped move the needle in it. It's just truly so heartbreaking that this woman's life was taken away when she had barely even gotten a chance to live it at all. And that's all before we remember that her killer was her friend. It is so heartbreaking and so sad how sometimes you can't even trust those closest to you. And the reason I said at the top of this episode that it's a cautionary tale is because it's just a reminder when you are out at night, even if you think you're getting home safe from your friend, an Uber, whomever it is, maybe take extra precautions. because it seems like you can't even trust those who are closest to you. So, thank you so much for hearing Key's story today and what happened to her. And hopefully it helps generate some more awareness about how young women and anybody in general can protect themselves and take more steps into, just making sure that they get home safely, that they're around trusted people, and it's just another example of how easily people can take advantage. So I appreciate you hearing her story. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and until the next one, stay safe. Bye.